Hi, Jason. Welcome to the podcast episode of the ICA Health and Wellness Committee. And we are thrilled to have you in this podcast. So thank you for accepting the invitation.
Thanks, Chab. I'm excited to be here.
So before we start the discussion, let me introduce you a little bit to the audience. Jason Shafer joined the Colorado Symphony as the Principal Clarinetist in 2013. And Jason teaches graduate and undergraduate clarinet majors at University of Northern Colorado in the School of Music and is on the faculty at the International Festival Institute at Round Top in Texas. Jason has appeared in guest principal roles with the Philadelphia Orchestra and the Cincinnati Symphony. He is also principal clarinet at the Sun Valley Music Festival. Jason has performed in Thailand, Austria, Estonia, and Russia. He has been fascinated by performance psychology for the entire career and recently completed his master's degree in performance psychology. Works with musicians, clients, both individuals and groups, to help them work through issues related to performance anxiety, confidence, and more. Jason completed a master's degree in performance psychology and is currently in the process of earning the Certificate Mental Performance Consultant designation through the Association for Applied Sport Psychology. Wow, Jason, that's a lot under your belt regarding.
I was going to say, thanks for the very thorough intro.
Yeah, you don't recognize it when you're doing that, only when you have already completed and just piled up all those certifications and experiences. That's when it really adds up and you see how much you've done. So we are very thrilled to have you here as the Health and Wellness Committee focuses on performance anxiety and psychology and the related fields. So Jason, how did you arrive to this performance psychology master's degree as well as the fascination with performance psychology in your life?
Yeah, thanks. I think I have to say that at least throughout my whole career, including now, I still get super nervous to perform. I still, have always struggled with nerves. I mean, I think so many of us in many different ways just go through periods in which we struggle more with one aspect of that: confidence, performance anxiety. There's all sorts of different ways you can put it. And I first really found my love of it when I was a fellow with the New World Symphony in Miami Beach. And at that time, the administration there was bringing in Noah Kageyama, who many people listening to this podcast will be familiar with. He runs the Bulletproof Musician blog and is just incredible, amazing performance psychologist. And in my first few times working with him, it was just like this incredible, mind-blowing experience of, wow, performance psychology just has so much to offer us as performers. And at that time, I was going through the incredibly stressful experiences of constantly auditioning for different professional orchestras. And it was, I really believe, a combination of all sorts of factors that made me feel better and better at auditions. But I still believe that the performance psychology side was one of the biggest ones for me. So as I began and continued with the Colorado Symphony and with the teaching that I do now, I just realized that all of my students in some way are benefiting from some part of performance psychology. And I started to have musicians and other performers reaching out to me for advice. And it was actually Noah Kageyama who told me, hey, if you're really loving this, I should really go for it and study it more in depth. So it's kind of that, that feeling when you really love doing something like practicing clarinet, for instance. A lot of times it feels really fun. And so doing the studies this way just felt like a joy to get this master's degree. So that's kind of how I arrived at this point, and it's relatively new for me, so I'm really excited to see what the next few years hold with it.
Absolutely, thank you very much. I think many of the professional musicians go through the process of stress, even though they might be well acquainted with their instruments. They might be grounded in what they do and has experience for decades, but still, the option of stress, that extra, that healthy stress
Yes.
Yeah, that performers need to have. It's always there, and managing that, it's managing a beast or a monster sometimes.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of people, one of the biggest misconceptions a lot of us have is that we need to eradicate our performance anxiety. We need to get rid of it. And I think stress is so normal performing. I mean, I think we want to have performance anxiety, we want to have stress, and we want to have that higher level of excitement when we're playing. And I think that's why we're titling the podcast something like Managing Performance Anxiety, not destroying or battling, or, it's kind of learning to live with it better.
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned performance psychology. What is exactly performance psychology, and how's it different from other resources from performance anxiety?
Sure. Performance psychology is usually the term that's used now, but more people will be familiar with sports psychology. So actually, the field of sports psychology is almost as old as just psychology itself. The first experiments in sports psychology were quite a long time ago and around some of the same times as the main first psychology experiments. So sports psychology really is still what gets the most attention. But as research continued over the course of many years, more and more understanding of this idea that the research that's being done on athletes is so applicable to us in the performing arts and other fields as well. So there's more of this umbrella term now of performance psychology, and it's actually used still, of course, a massive amount with athletes, but also with business people, performing artists, even surgeons actually use performance psychology to help them. And the idea of what it is essentially a field that any recommendations that are made by somebody who works in performance psychology is based on the scientific method. So it's based on experiments, it's based on studying evidence. So there's kind of a level of comfort, I think, that comes with looking at the concepts of performance psychology, saying, well, of course, these things are always evolving and new evidence can come out and change what we recommend or what we think about. But I think comfort is the word I like to use, that, wow, this has been studied quite a lot and examining many different types of performers. So I'm certainly not saying that, there's many ways to manage our performance issues, performance anxiety. And I wouldn't want to downplay any of those, because the true important thing is if something works for you, that's fantastic. And that's what matters. But if you're kind of really not sure where to start as you're trying to figure out how you want to manage these things, performance psychology is a great place to start.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much. So I think we musicians hear performance anxiety quite a lot. Not as much might be for performance psychology, but now you explain the difference and how it relates to musicians. And I believe that Noah Kageyama has mentioned that you have worked with him when he was doing a Juilliard in his string program. He also learned from Don Green, who was there using or giving master classes and courses on this very subject that hooked Noah up, and then you got that stream as well. So my next question would be, we're talking about anxiety, performance anxiety, and and stress. What is the difference between stress and anxiety, and what proportions are healthy and good? What is that the amount of stress or anxiety when we should actually turn to someone for help, or start reading things, or talk to someone that can help us, and what is that amount that is really natural and good, and you need to have it. You just don't go overboard with that.
Great question. I think when we look at that idea of stress versus anxiety, if we start with stress, the idea of stress is normal performing. When we are in our practice room by ourselves, unless you drink a way too much coffee, you're probably going to be at a lower level of stress than when you're in front of 1,000 people or even one person. Our stress goes up. So I think stress is that natural body response of trying to prepare ourselves for a difficult situation, for something that's difficult to do. And there's actually a lot of theories in performance psychology of how do we handle that. And one of the most dominant theories is the individual zones of optimal functioning, is what it's called. And in short, it really means that there's no one amount that everybody should have. It's that each of us has an individual zone of a level of stress that actually we perform optimally, that we perform well. So it's not that, if you're not in that exact zone, you can't perform, but that you're trying to get in that zone as much as possible. So we, can use various techniques to try to keep ourselves in that zone. As opposed to anxiety, it's interesting because I've talked to Noah a little bit about this, that sometimes people don't like that term. We don't like to actually say anxiety. And at least the way I view it is that I think it's a personal opinion, a personal decision. I actually like to say that I have performance anxiety because to me that feels the most right, that's what it is. I mean, I have anxiety, like I think about it, I'm worried about it. There's symptoms of kind of a general life anxiety that happen in my performing. And so I'm happy to say performance anxiety as a term. It's not tremendously different from the idea of stress in general, I think. But I also think it's completely acceptable to rename it and say, no, I don't like to call it performance anxiety. I'd prefer to call it performance stress. So I think there's kind of some interchangeable aspects there.
Absolutely. So that leads me actually to my follow-up question. Do you think, at least it seems like from your explanation, that stress and anxiety is pretty much the same thing, it's just a different level, right?
Yeah.
So we can say stress is a little bit heightened emotional state, and anxiety is very much a heightened emotional state of preparation.
Yeah, I think basically I would say that you could view it either way in a sense. Like you could be at an extremely high level of excitement and you can still say for yourself, I'm going to just call it stress because I don't want to call it anxiety. But I think the truth is that, yeah, and it could be easily defined as anxiety no matter what. I mean, just like in life, we can have a small amount of anxiety about something or we can have a large amount. It's really our brains like preparing us to deal with a stressful situation. I mean, it's strange, but so much of the reaction we get to performing under pressure is so similar to if you see a mouse running at you or something, or maybe a bear would be a better example because that's a little more scary and dangerous. But we get that sort of fight or flight reaction. And that's really where the term anxiety comes in a lot, is thinking about, wow, I'm reacting in a very similar way that I would as if a bear was running at me. So yeah, a lot of times I think we talk about those terms relatively interchangeably.
Why do you think we get stressed or we get anxiety in front of a performance or before a performance for either a concert, studio concert, or a smaller audition for a community orchestra, or a larger audition for a community orchestra?
That's a great question. I think in short, if I really back up and I think about what's natural for us, I mean, even evolutionarily, I'm not sure that the human was evolved to stand in front of 1,000 people and play a little piece of wood with some metal on it and try to make it work and have an intense judgment. So I think there's something that, in a way, is very unusual, that isn't quite like our normal lives. And in a day, you wake up, you eat, you teach, you do various things, but it's very similar in some sense to standing on a podium and speaking to thousands of people and having that fear of public speaking. I think for a lot of people, it's that added layer of judgment that's what most people, I think, struggle with, is realizing that, okay, I love making music, but suddenly now I'm sharing it with so many other human beings that are listening intently to me. And I think it's the intensity of that judgment, but also presence of that many people that you're interacting with that tends to raise that level of excitement. Yeah, similar to a sports, any sports team, a football player is, probably going to be a lot more relaxed when they're practicing by themselves, or even just in a team scrimmage or something along those lines, as opposed to suddenly there's thousands of people watching them on TV. Very similar for us in the arts.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I was going to have another question regarding that. So you mentioned that sometimes the fear of judgment that people have anxiety for. You think it might be part sometimes of this anxiety process that people feel the need to provide their total output between 90 and 100%, and they're not sure if they can do that at that point, at that time, at that venue, at that place, or it's really what you mentioned that it's just the judgment of people. They're gonna like it. They're not gonna like it. Once you're confident in your professional instrument, I think there's less of an anxiety about ourselves. It might be more of the external anxiety that we project to, coming from other people. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting question, because it gets to when I first talk to somebody who's really struggling with confidence or performance anxiety or any of those things, the actual genesis of that does differ from person to person. I mean, I've met people that say, if we take clarinet, for example, I know that I can play this piece and I feel fantastic when I'm by myself. Like, I have no doubts about my clarinet performance ability. But when I'm in front of people, all I can think about is, are they judging me, or all these negative thoughts or things like that. On a flip side, I've met a lot of people that say, I actually don't believe at all that I'm good enough to play this piece or to perform this piece, and I don't really have any trust in my ability itself to perform. And still others just struggle with more physical symptoms and more just, no, I feel mentally great and I can really get into the music, but I'm just so stressed about the fact that when I perform, I shake. So it's interesting, because I think, and I mean, we all have that kind of experience. And so I think when we really are getting at, I guess, the issues that come up with performing and with performance anxiety, I think the very first step is actually understanding yourself and really realizing what exactly does happen to me, because I think that question really then facilitates us figuring out how we can work on it, because there's not the exact same path for overcoming it for each person.
Absolutely. Do you think that stress or anxiety in different parts of life, we treat performance anxiety or performance stress in music, in the music scene, in the musical profession? Because we all experience stress and anxiety at various parts of our lives, in various things in life, including music performance. And so do you think that when it comes to music performance, it's a more heightened stress or anxiety, or it could be the same type of anxiety the person might experience before a job interview, or let's say a wedding, or any other life events, that might bring the stress and anxiety?
Okay, so yeah, I think it's a great question. And I think that when we're talking about music performance compared to other life stress, certainly our performing can be incredibly similar to other types of little mini performances, like a wedding or giving a public speech. In a way, those are also performances. I think the other way I would actually answer your question is that I was actually talking to a few other people who are working on primarily wanting to work with athletes on performance related issues. And they asked me, well, what's one of the biggest differences about working with performing artists compared to athletes? And one of them that I said is that I, in many, many cases, if not the majority, recommend that someone does reach out to a mental health professional for therapy, because there's just such a preponderance of general anxiety in the lives of performing artists for so many reasons that probably we don't have time to get into here. But I find that actually the majority of even just the clients that I work with for performance anxiety related issues are also seeing a therapist in addition to me. And I think that's a fantastic thing and wonderful. And I really encourage people to do that, because I think as we learn to manage the general anxiety in our lives, I think we really are helping manage our ability to respond to that performing as well.
Absolutely, thank you. I actually love the word you use, preponderance. I haven't heard it for at least a decade, and I love that word. It sounds so good. But going back to the point you were making, when I talked to the OBO professor and first oboist of the Las Vegas Symphony Orchestra, many years ago, we were talking about musicians and how being a or musicianship actually is compared to a Formula One racer person who is there. He is the one to perform, and there are groups for the engine, and there are groups for the performance, and there's groups for the bodywork, and there's groups for any other things, and really they build up that performer as a group of people, and we should think about the same way
Yes.
when it comes to a musician or performance of a musician.
Yes, it's one of the things I like to tell my students is that it's both the best thing and the worst thing about music, that it's so personal.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the best thing because it's part of our lives and we express ourselves and we get to, have a personal involvement with music. But in a sense, it's the worst thing because what we struggle with as human beings often comes out on stage. And I love what you said. It's really taking a more holistic view of this, that it's really a whole team of your community and your support network and who you include on that support network that does eventually help us overcome these kind of things.
Absolutely. Um, Talking about the general anxiety mentioned in life in regard to performance anxiety, is there a crossover between anxiety experience outside of musical performance or music profession? Does it affect musical or music anxiety or performance anxiety? And does musical related performance anxiety, does it relate to other parts of life?
I think that's a great question. I think, yeah, we were talking a little bit about how it's related to us, as human beings, and how our innate experiences affect us on stage. I would say it's more of a personal thing, from person to person, individual, I should say. That I've met some people that have massive amounts of generalized anxiety in their lives because of things they're going through personally, and yet feel wonderful performing. And I've certainly met other people who feel like they're the total opposite, have zero anxiety in their life. Well, nobody has that. We have a little bit, but feel generally that they would say, oh, I'm not an anxious person at all. I never get anxious about anything other than performing. So I think it's really more of a self-awareness thing. It's kind of having an awareness of, are those things really connected for me or not? Because I wouldn't say for everybody they always are.
Yes, absolutely. I love that you mentioned awareness because I think that is key to eventually coping with any sorts of challenges in life. And I think the older we get, the more experience, let's put it that way, the more experience we gather throughout life, the more aware we are of ourselves, our surrounding, other people, what we do, what we say, what others do, what others say. So I think that can be a benefit to everyone else, right? So
Yes.
what would be some of the examples that of mental skills that you say either can be strengthened or focused on, or even have an awareness of when we talk about performance anxiety and stress?
Absolutely. So this is actually really the core of what I do with a lot of people, is this idea of we can develop mental skills just like you develop your articulation, or just like you work on technique or something like that. You can practice mental skills that are actual strengthenable. That's not a word, preponderance I got, but that one I don't think I can use. That actually can be strengthened and actually become part of your toolbox, so that you can rely upon those mental skills in order to help you through performing more confidently. And I could talk about this for hours, so I won't. So I'll kind of give for me, if someone out there is listening to this and they're saying, yes, there's something I really want to try on my own first, here's a few things that I think you could explore and read about. I'll just briefly mention three that I find, there's many more, but three that I find really particularly valuable for a lot of musicians. The first one that comes to mind is goal setting, because I feel like for a very large amount of us, we have a tendency to set goals that are actually make our performance worse. And in general, those goals tend to be outcome goals. So it's the things like, well, if this performance will be a success, if my teacher comes up to me afterward and says it was good, or this audition will be a success if I win. You know, those are the kinds of goals that actually increase the pressure on ourselves. And so instead, one of the things that we try to do is add in goals that are actually process goals. So it's the idea of, okay, this audition will be a success if after the whole process is over, I have really learned something from that audition, I've gotten something out of the experience. Or this audition will be a success if I feel that I've been able to perform really musically. Something like that, something that's actually within your control. And those outcome goals are still there. Of course, you care about the result, but that we're really learning to incorporate more of those process goals as part of it too. So that's a very kind of quick summary of how goal setting can actually change the way we view performing. Feel free to interrupt me if I'm blanking too much.
I wanted to just emphasize on what you said, that setting goals should be something that is within your control, because it is really hard. I mean, to set, and we sometimes do. I do it sometimes to set goals that are outside of my control, and if it doesn't work out that way, then I feel I failed, right? Which is pretty much a kind of cheating on myself. And so really something that you can really control should be within the range of goal setting. Yeah, so I would just love that.
No, that's beautifully put. And I think it's particularly the case that, well, we often think that we want to only set process goals. And I like to tell people it's okay to accept that there's still a little outcome goal there. You know, like you can't, I think it's unreasonable to say that you can go take an audition and not care at all about the result. I mean, we want to care. It's okay that we'll be disappointed about the outcome if it's not what we want. But I think that once we start to really believe and love having those controllable goals, that's when you're absolutely right. That's when I think our performance starts to get more, at least even just the way that we view performances becomes more healthy.
Absolutely. So you mentioned some of the outcome goals within goal setting. How about some goals that we can set that will bring us to our outcome? What would you suggest about setting those goals?
I think if an outcome, let's say an outcome, for example, is that you really want to get a position with a military band, if I just put that out there, then yes, of course, like each audition you take for a military band, if you don't win it, you might just think, okay, well, I failed. Like you just said that example. But if you have all these other goals that are part of it, which is, well, actually at that audition, I was really happy about that goal I set to really play very musically. And I loved the fact that I played really musically. Or maybe that it's okay, more if we back up a little bit and it's like, well, if my goal is, part of my goal is to really learn something about in the process that I didn't do particularly well that I can improve on the next time, then that becomes something you journal about afterward and go, wow, I really know now this is something I'm going to change. And in your next audition, then you have a process goal to incorporate that new information you have. So it becomes kind of an evolving process of setting different types of goals, but even just that process then allows you to view each audition you take as a success and something that's encouraging and something that's exciting for you. And that then, the idea of seeing these stressful performances as successes, I think then encourages us and makes us feel more and more confident. So again, I can't sort of say, oh, everyone should set this particular goal. It's of course so different from person to person, but I hope that kind of explains
Yes,
that a bit.
absolutely, absolutely. Thank you very much. What are some of the attentional control strategies that you can talk about? And when we talk about attention, it's more when we get stressed. My attention might be focused on one aspect of playing or two aspects, or even what are you talking about? And when we talk
Yes.
about orchestral audition, not behind a curtain, but direct, straight, face-to-face audition. Oh, they're just talking about something, or oh, there's a person just walked in an auditorium. So what can we do with our attention as we prepare for?
Yes, performing is great. This is the second mental skill that we were talking about a little bit before that I use with a lot of people, and it's the concept of understanding and having awareness of where we are putting our conscious attention. Our brain is doing an unbelievable amount of things unconsciously, but we actually can develop as a mental skill our as much control as we can over where we place that attention. And you just gave fantastic examples of I think a lot of us have had that experience of performing on stage and we suddenly see someone come in and now all we're doing is thinking about them so this is exactly that. For me, it often was, oh, I'm performing and all I can do is think about the mistakes I just made. That's a common one, and that's my most common thing that happens to me. So this is a mental skill, again, that can be strengthened. And there's many different ways to do it. Again, a complicated conversation. And someone's really registering with this as they listen to that. I would really encourage them. We'll talk about at the end here to talk about a couple of resources they can look at. But one of them is Noah's blog, Noah Kageyama, the Bulletproof Musician. He has some fantastic articles on this topic, especially, where you're learning even in the practice room to strengthen that. So if I just give a little brief example of one of the ways that can be done is if you take a passage of music that you've learned and you're thinking about, okay, well, in an ideal situation, what would I want to be thinking about while I play this? And it may be a character, it may be something, about the music or the story, it might be something about the expression of it. It could be a number of things, but it's something external, something that is not do this with your fingers or something like that, something that takes your attention away from all of that. And you practice using it. So you might even play it once thinking critically, and then you might play it once totally trying your hardest to get into that attentional focus that you want. And then maybe going back and forth between those two focuses. But examining in this type of practice, am I getting more and more the ability to stay where I want in that attentional focus? And there's various ways that then we can advance that so that you get to the point where even under pressure, that really is a skill you can rely on.
Yeah. So we can confidently say that you don't lose your attention when your attention is focused on something else, and it should be focused on, right? It just plays somewhere else in the milieu of what you're doing, right? So it's not that we lose attention and we have to scramble to get it back. But it's just we place an attention, the focal point of that attention somewhere else. And whether it's a person or, as mentioned, your finger work, dexterity as you're playing. And I like to say that a healthy balance is between being introspective when we are talking about, oh, what am I feeling? Oh, my thoughts, oh my fingers. And being and between introspective and extrospective when we really focus on things that are outside of our reach and control, the all-inclusive attention that we should facilitate. And personally, when I had been in stressful situations, concerts, auditions, recordings, it really helped me personally to focus on the music making. So I made it my purpose to really think about the music, my connection to that piece, my emotional, what I feel when I play that piece, what I think when I practice and play that piece. and to really come back to that, even if my attention gets dispersed or loses focus from the music, if I think about the music and exactly how I feel and what my emotional, mental, and physical connection to that music is, it really helped me refocus or redirect to the attention, as you mentioned.
You just said the thing that I find is actually one of the most important aspects of this skill is actually accepting and being okay with the fact that when you're performing, your attention probably is going to go somewhere else occasionally because of something that happens or stress or that scary person walks in the room or whatever. And what you just said was bringing it back to the music. And I think it's a lot healthier to develop this as a skill. I really like to call it redirection as opposed to control, because if you lose control for a minute of your attention, you might think I'm failing, but instead we can think, no, it's actually normal to kind of lose our focus for a minute, and I have the skill to bring it back. That's what we want to be able to tell ourselves.
Thank you. The next skill that we might want to talk about is activation. So what is activation exactly? I have come across that phrase in Don Green's Performance Success book, and I read about that extensively, but not everyone of us might be familiar with activation. And what is a correct amount of activation?
I think, yes. So activation is the term that, at least in a performance psychology perspective, we use to talk about what we were actually talking about earlier with stress and anxiety. Activation is kind of that umbrella term that's sort of saying, yeah, when you are falling asleep, you're probably at the lowest level of activation. When you're screaming and panicking, you're probably at the highest. So it's this idea of understanding that when we are under pressure performing, our activation is going to be a little higher. And it's trying to figure out this is that third mental skill I was talking about, is this idea of activation management, which is where how can we use skills to put ourselves in that optimal zone where we know we thrive? So this can take actually a lot of forms. The most common is some form of breathing exercise. If anybody, there's a lot of great breathing exercises out there. People talk about box breathing, talk about diaphragmatic breathing. It's fantastic. One of the things I would say in terms of breathing that's most important is for people to really truly learn to breathe diaphragmatically in a way that really relaxes their body. And then perhaps if you want to use a breathing exercise, cyclic sighing is one that is worth looking into. That's had some really interesting research behind it. It's not the only breathing exercise out there, but really that's a potential skill that we can be using, especially before performances, to kind of lower our activation level back down to where we want it to be.
Would you like to talk a little bit about that method? Because I have actually not heard that phrase before. So it's a brand new thing to me.
Yeah, there was a really interesting study done on cyclic sighing. I hope there will be more soon as well, that it actually was effective on a daily basis for even managing people's generalized anxiety throughout the day. It's very similar to box breathing, where you inhale a few counts halfway full, inhale a few more counts all the way full, and then your exhalation is double what your inhalation was. So let's say you inhale 3 counts halfway, 3 more fully, that's a total of 6. So then your exhalation becomes 12 in terms of whatever count you're using. I think if you're even Googling this or looking it up, that's something you can probably easily find some way of describing this breathing exercise. It's actually very similar in some ways to box breathing, which is more of a regimented equal amounts. But again, I think actually the exact exercise itself isn't tremendously important as long as it is really, you feel that it's helping lower that level of activation within you. Other sort of pre-performance ones are things like meditation, yoga, those kinds of pre-performance routines. There's ways of becoming more aware of your body, progressive muscle relaxation. There's a lot of things that you can experiment with to try. But for me, the last thing I was actually going to say about this topic is a lot of us, I think, don't quite realize how we may be making our activation level worse while we're performing. So this idea of I remember even personally, there were so many clarinet performances I gave where every time I had a rest or anytime I had a few bars rest in a piece, I was just holding total tension in my body all the time, like not breathing relaxedly, just breathing really shallowly. And one of the skills we can develop is the ability to really actually release our bodies physically as much as we can and find that release in there while we have those moments of pause in our music. So these are all different ways that we can manage that physical activation that we get while we're really under stress.
Nice. You mentioned a very important aspect of music performance. We can focus on things and music making when we're actually performing. But what happens when we have a measure of rest or a couple of measures of rest and we can't really focus on what we are doing? So what would you suggest to the audience would be some of the redirection? Because we might need to redirect attention, or if you focus attention on something else that is relaxing, what would you suggest?
It's an interesting question because you just talked about something that I do with a lot of people, which is figuring out how can we actually combine some of these skills. And you just talked about using your attention to help you relax. In one sense, I think for a lot of people, we don't want to necessarily need to have to focus on relaxing while we perform. We would hope that we can develop it as a skill that it almost happens more naturally. So from one sense, I actually would say for a lot of us, we practice that skill of relaxing and rests in the practice room, and we practice doing it in front of other people so that it becomes more of a natural skill. And that, of course, takes quite a bit of time. But if we are still kind of in that development phase of acquiring that skill really confidently, I think that when we're combining it with attention, one of the ways that we can do that is allowing ourselves to take a quick dip in attention when we're in one of those rests to focus on a simple trigger word like release the body or one relaxed breath or something like that. You can even write it in your music. And then you have another word right before the music starts again of, okay, sing, or whatever that character is that gets you right back into it. So you're absolutely right. We can kind of use these attentional strategies, at least at first, to really start to incorporate that release.
Nice. Thank you very much. I loved the written cues in the music because they are so helpful. It really reminds you right on the spot when you have to perform something or think or do something. Those are
stickers are great too. If you really like colorful stickers, you can use those.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, deep breathing on the second beat.
Right.
Right before the entrance. Yeah, I love it. Is there any, or are there any other strategies that we can mention that help us manage anxiety or stress?
Sure. I think that there's certainly a large toolbox of skills that I like to try to think about what are the best fit, for each person that I'm working with or students of mine, and for myself as well. And I think, rather than go through a lot of them in detail, people who are interested in some of these should, kind of explore them a bit. There's visualization. Well, many people have probably tried that, where you're practicing the skill of imagining a performance in detail. There's self-talk strategies, so people who are really struggling with a lot of negative view of themselves, learning to sort of explore and really keep as part of our practice time, actually. How do I improve and have a healthier self-talk towards myself? Those two are probably two of the most common. There are more specific ones as well, such as like a mantra, like developing a specific phrase for yourself that you repeat quite a lot. There's actually quite a bit of research on that as well. So I think maybe one of the things I love about performance psychology is there's a lot to explore. And even if you're looking at someone like Noah Kageyama's blog, you can go in and read all of these free articles that are there and see, wow, I never would have thought of using that, or I never would have thought of using that. So I think, mentioning things like the visualization or the self-talk or the mantra, Adversity training is another one. I think looking at a lot of these, what I encourage people to do is it can be a little overwhelming at first when we explore performance psychology, because it's like, oh my gosh, I should try all 10 of these things this week, you know? And I think a better approach to exploring it is to say, wow, this idea, this mental skill really appeals to me. And it feels like a good, that really makes sense to me. I really want to try that. And to say, let me try that really well, really thoroughly, and really commit to it for a while. And then explore some of the other ones as time allows later.
I agree with that. Really, on the same accord, I think when we read about a lot of approaches to managing performance anxiety and stress, really we have to go by either gut feeling or what really appeals to our thinking, to our emotional intelligence and experience and everything else, to see how they help us first. When we do that, really that's a good way to go by. What do you suggest for those that are preparing for audition? Any strategies that they can prepare, they can work on, they can look up and start, working with?
Yeah, I think auditions in particular are probably one of the biggest triggers for us in terms of feeling worse than normal. Or, there's a lot of people that will say, oh, I don't mind playing a recital, but when it's an audition, I can't do that. So I think, especially when we have auditions, the very simple thing I would say actually is it's a great opportunity to try a mental skill. I think a lot of us just think for auditions, well, I'm just going to practice harder than I ever have, and that's what's going to give me success. And I think when we instead view an audition as, it makes sense that I'm a little more stressed about this. It's a very judgmental situation. What is one of these mental skills, or two, perhaps, if you've been doing this for a while, that I want to build into my audition preparation plan? I think that very simple step and that very simple question, most people don't ask themselves. They kind of just say, well, I'll just work really hard. And yes, we should work really hard. But I think accepting that auditions are stressful and actually saying, okay, I'm going to, as part of my audition prep, really build in some attentional redirection practice and working on that attention skill or goal setting or anything along those lines. I think that step is actually the most important one that most people don't take, is to say, I'm going to actually incorporate mental skills and acceptance of that stress into my preparation.
Yep. I think that's a really good one, because you will have stress, you will face stress to a certain degree and amount. And when you mentioned visualization and visualization in the rehearsal room, I think that was one of the single strategy that really helped me cope with feelings, thoughts, right on the spot at the performance.
Yes.
And just thinking about the venue, thinking about how many people I might be facing, who am I playing with. I think it really helped me in preparation to auditions as well as recitals. I remember talking to, and I don't remember her name anymore, she won a first principal oboe position in one of the Canadian orchestra. She mentioned that before she actually won the audition, she had gone to that venue to check it out, and they let her in, and she went there, and she just felt. She did not practice there, but she went there, and she really just felt it, what it would be like. She stood there and she imagined the things that were going to transpire there the next day, and it really helped her. She said she contributed much of her success at the audition.
I think, and that for her obviously was something where she really felt like that particular mental skill, and for you, as you said, like really registered with her as that's going to really help. I also have found it as an extremely helpful one for myself as well.
Yeah. My next question would be, how can somebody overcome the mental chances of recovering from a significant injury, or might be a significant performance failure, let's say, if you put it that way?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, I think I'm glad you brought up injuries, because I think it's something Honestly, at least from my experience, from musicians I've talked to, I think the majority of musicians have had some kind of injury, you know, and sometimes small. I hope it's small for people, but sometimes very major. And a lot of times having those physical injuries ends up actually causing some kind of psychological effect. Sometimes it's probably most commonly, it's an idea of having to take quite a bit of time off to heal. And then now I'm coming back to performing, and now I feel scared. I haven't performed in so long. Or on the flip side, for a lot of people, it's that the injury itself promotes a little bit of lack of confidence in our ability. So we kind of think, okay, well, now that I've recovered from this tendonitis, is my arm strong enough? You know, can I actually play? So I think that the number one thing I would say is actually first, something you emphasized earlier, I think is important, is awareness. And a lot of people who have an injury actually try to sort of ignore, I think, that additional pressure or nerves and just think that'll go away, you know? And sometimes it will, but I think that first step is really acknowledging, yes, there's a little bit of extra stress here. There's a little bit of extra anxiety because of what I've gone through. And then what am I going to do about that? And I really would encourage anybody that's feeling that situation to reach out and talk to someone. I think certainly it can be a therapist, but that's also something that those of us that work in performance psychology are very familiar with talking about. And sometimes it's just the development of trying to figure out, well, what is the mental skill that we need in order to feel more confident again? It can be visualizing that, yes, I am confident with my injury. It can also be, I think for a lot of people, there's actually sort of more of a journaling aspect, which those who are familiar with CBT therapy, kind of similar along those lines, where you're gathering and writing down evidence that, yes, look, I practiced for 2 hours today and I felt great physically, or I performed 2 concerts and I was a little nervous about that injury, but it went great. So there's strategies like that that can help you regain that confidence after something like that.
Absolutely. And as you mentioned earlier in the podcast, I think if they reach out, if it's at that level, if they reach out to a therapist or a psychologist, that can really help straighten the thoughts and thought processes in one's brain, so it's really on the right track to recovery and helping and strengthening is also a great way to go by about it.
Yes.
Since I mentioned in the introduction that you have completed your master's in performance psychology, what is the best thing or most valued information or knowledge or skill, however we want to put it, that you've experienced or you learned in your program?
I think it's a great question. Probably one of the most cliche things that people say is, everybody's different. It's like, well, yes, but I think the sort of nuance to that I do feel that I got a lot out of the studying a lot of this performance psychology, and I should say continued study, because we always have to be learning more and new research is coming out all the time. But one of the biggest things that made me think, my initial response to your question, is that idea of individuality, is the fact that I've been amazed at what works for other people that's so different than what works for me. And I think I used to really, before I studied a lot of the concepts of performance psychology in more depth, I used to really take the approach of helping students with exactly the things that helped me. And one of the coolest things about performance psychology is that there's virtually nothing that I would be worried about it harming. I think the worst thing that usually happens is you try a mental skill that's part of performance psychology and it doesn't help you very much, but it very rarely does anything that's harmful. I haven't really seen that. So the good thing is there's not much danger in trying it. But what I think is fascinating is that I love watching someone go through the experimentation of trying out this mental skill or this concept of performance psychology and finding it's one of my favorite ones, And then they're like, nah, I don't really like that. It's like, okay, great. Like, I think that's fantastic. So I think for me, it's this idea of we're all trying to grow our toolbox of these things that help us. And I think instead of us all reading one article that says you must do this and this is the one thing that you should do, that's not necessarily true. We want to maybe try that thing and give it an experiment and then decide if we want to keep it.
I really agree with you because we are like puzzle pieces, right?
Yeah.
And you know what really fits me might not fit you or won't fit you because you have different strengths and different weaknesses. And if I had a weakness that really got strengthened by a skill, and that skill is really a strength for you, you might say, it doesn't really help because I have different weaknesses. So, I absolutely agree with that. What can you advise? So, where can people go to, let's say, high school age kids, or even younger kids, university age kids, and adult professionals, as well as even, university professors or in the teaching field? What are some resources they can use, they can go to, or people, they can look up, just like now Guillermo mentioned a couple of times. What are some of these resources you can really advise the audience to start the recovery or discovery process for themselves?
Yeah, absolutely. I think anybody who's listening to this that's going, I'm really interested, I want to explore this more. I know I've mentioned Noah a couple of times, but I definitely still recommend him as my #1 resource. I think after this podcast, maybe we're able to share a little bit of the websites written out somewhere. Is that right?
We will include the materials and the website and the links that you deem to be shared. Yeah.
Okay, great. So if you're checking out those links, that first one I would say is Noah's bulletproofmusician.com website. And especially to start with, checking out the blog. There's just hundreds of articles that you can even search for a particular topic. You could even type in attention, or type in visualization, or type in practice skills for healthy practicing, and explore a lot of these ideas that he's sharing for free right out there. And if you're really excited about that too, he has group sessions that he leads that you can get involved with, and you can join some of these groups. You can work with him individually as well. So he's just an incredible expert, and I really highly recommend him. Another person as well is Christine Carter. She's a fantastic clarinetist, and also really, really doing incredible research into performance psychology, and also working with people. She also has a blog. She also has a lot of really fantastic material to explore. So Christine is fantastic. Looking at her website is great. And if anybody's interested in talking to me or touching base with me, I also have a website as well that you can contact me on. I'm always happy if something I said today, or you're interested in working with me, I'm definitely happy to kind of follow up and answer any questions that anybody has there. I think the only other thing I'd mention is that a lot of people ask me, well, what's a book I can read? And, there's a lot of fantastic books out there. I mean, really, really great stuff. And I can certainly recommend a few. We might be able to list some, but more often than not, I love encouraging people, read as much as you can about this if you love it and you're really interested in it, but also remember that one book of any kind isn't going to have all the answers for you. Kind of like what we were talking about before with the individualization. I've met a lot of people that read one book on a very narrow topic and are so excited about it. And I think that's great. But a lot of times, sometimes that narrow focus doesn't quite have all the answers that you need. So I'd really encourage people to kind of become part of a community, connecting with people, talking about this stuff and discovering, like you were saying, this process of discovery. I think if that comes from a lot of different sources, please read. It's great. But I definitely encourage people that really want to explore performance psychology to just not only read books about it.
Absolutely. We need to put it into the motor skills, even if it's mental. We need to put it into the motor skills so it's effective. Yes. Very good. No, thank you very much. And Jason, your website is crescendopc.com, just like as it's spelled in Italian. And you are Denver based, right?
That's correct. Yeah, but I actually talk to people all over the place, usually Zoom or phone or whatever. So yeah, I'm always happy to connect with anyone, even if they're not local.
Yeah, absolutely. So if there's anyone that is located in Colorado, then Jason is in Denver, and obviously his website is you can contact them. And then we kind of got to the end of the discussion right now. I am really grateful, Jason, for you being able to be here and share expertise and really talk about stress and anxiety, because it is a debilitating effect in musicians' life. Not just musicians, but we are talking about many musicians, and we really want to help people out there. So if they want to contact you or any of those people, whose links and contact will be shared either on YouTube in the comment section or in the description section, or any other podcast platforms that this will be disseminated on in the description section, then you're welcome to do that. And as Jason said, read as much as you can and put it into practice. And we're grateful for your expertise again, Jason. And we're glad that we could have you here.
Well, Chaba, thank you. I have to say also, it's I'm just so happy, first of all, to be invited, but also just that these conversations continue. You know, even 15, 20 years ago, there really weren't almost any resources that really were well known at the time for people to reach out to for these things, and as musicians. So I'm really excited that we're having these conversations. It's great.
Absolutely. Me too. Yeah, great. Thank you very much, Jason.
Thank you. Take care.
And I would like to invite the audience that we are going to have a panel discussion on performance anxiety at the upcoming Clarinet Fest conference in Ireland, Dublin. And it's going to be an hour discussion, and it will be with the members of the Health and Wellness Committee of the International Clarinet Association. So we'll continue it there, and we'll have a follow-up panel discussion with Jason sometimes after that conference.
Awesome.